Truthout reporter Mike Ludwig is here to talk about another global trade agreement being hammered out. It's even worse than the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This is Truthout Interviews. I'm Ted Asregadoo. Hey Mike, thanks for being on Truthout Interviews.
Hey, good to see you again, Ted.
You too. Now, Julian Assange figures prominently in your article. He's the Wikileaks publisher who is apparently not being deterred from his asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. He announced that an agreement called the Trade-in Services Agreement has been released through Wikileaks. Can you talk a little bit about some of the key provisions in this agreement and why it's being billed as worse than the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Right. Well, WikiLeaks released documents from the negotiations for this agreement last week. They did it to coincide with the 2-year anniversary of Julian Assange seeking asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. And the documents themselves are some very complicated financial international agreements involving the flow of information, involving how different regulations in different countries can impact international finance firms. And by the analysis that WikiLeaks put together with some of its allies, they thought that, first of all, the negotiations have been kept even more secret than the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Very little information until now has been available about what is actually going on in these negotiations. We kind of know what they are about, but what have actually the diplomats involved, what they've been saying to each other has all been happening behind closed doors. So WikiLeaks, first of all, said that this has actually been kept more secret than the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which has been very controversial. They also took a look at the agreement. They had some academics look at it, and they were concerned that the agreement could force countries to be locked into regulatory changes or perhaps bureaucratic structural changes, that once they agree to these things, they'd be locked into these agreements. And that has trade unions in Europe concerned that, for instance, if a service such as transportation or water gets privatized in a country, and then that doesn't end up working out well under this agreement, a country won't be able to go back and put this back into public hands. So public service workers unions and trade unions are particularly concerned about this, especially in Europe.
So this seems to be the case of trying to, well, not only privatize formerly public domains, but I mean, there's a lot of union busting essentially going on here too.
Well, the unions are definitely concerned in Europe. They've been watching this closely. I don't think, in fact, most people hadn't even heard of what they're calling TISA or TISA, T-I-S-A, Trade and Services Agreement. A lot of us hadn't even heard about this until WikiLeaks made their dump of these documents. But there have been some trade unions in Europe who are concerned about this because they represent public employees and public employees unions, and they're concerned that this agreement could open the doors for deregulation and also for privatization of services in their countries. And that's what they're warning against right now and have been warning against for some time. Just no one really been listening to them because very little has been known about these negotiations.
Well, some of what you raise in your article, at least when I was reading it, it seemed like if this agreement goes through and things get, these former publicly managed entities become private, that this would just increase the kind of global financial crises that we saw on the onset of the Great Recession.
Well, if you look at who's really pushing for this deal right now, for instance, one of the biggest supporters and most vocal supporters in the United States is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and we know that they're consistently supporting privatization and deregulation of markets. It's also the governments within the WTO, within the World Trade Organization, that pushed for, like the United States, like Great Britain, that pushed for the kind of changes in the global financial system 5, 6, 8 years ago. These same countries pushed for these restructuring that ended up contributing to the global financial collapse. So what critics are concerned about is, like, you've got the same players really pushing for this agreement, and it was their decisions to deregulate and liberalize and globalize markets, in the past that put us in the situation we're in now. And I think that that is what has a lot of people concerned, especially people who are progressive and people who are critical of the way global markets have ended up panning out for maybe countries that aren't in the elite. And really, when you look closely at this stuff, it seems like this just makes it easier for big private financial institutions, coming out of New York, coming out of Paris, coming out of London. We're talking about Wall Street. We're talking about a lot of those kind of entities. It kind of makes them easier. It makes it easier for them to get into other countries and get into markets that may have been completely public before. So maybe, you know, water and transportation and waste disposal in this country has been public forever. These private entities want to get in there and start competing, and that's kind of what this is all about.
Gotcha. Well, what about Julian Assange? You know, he's wanted for publishing military documents and diplomatic cables, but there's the added charge of sexual assault. What's the latest on his situation?
Well, I was on a press call last week with Assange and his attorneys in London before they made this big drop. Now, the first thing they're going to tell you if you ask them about this is, whoa, whoa, whoa. Assange has not been charged yet with anything. He's just wanted for questioning because 2 women have made allegations of sexual assault against him. Now, everyone is kind of being ridiculous about this. The British government, on one hand, has spent £6 million, it's about $10 million, just patrolling the Ecuadorian embassy to snatch up Assange had he leave so he could be extradited to Sweden for questioning. Assange's lawyers are quick to point out that they've invited Swedish prosecutors to the embassy to question Assange, or they said, hey, why don't you question him over Skype or over the internet? We were not trying to hide him here from these Swedish prosecutors who want to know more information about this case. But Assange's lawyers say that that the Swedish prosecutors have so far refused any of these offers. Assange himself and his lawyers believe that if he does leave the embassy to go to Sweden to answer these questions, he'll get, and I quote, a one-way ticket to the United States to face charges over the military documents that were leaked by Chelsea Manning to WikiLeaks a few years ago. And so it's kind of complicated, and it's really, we're not, and new information came out this week, at least from Assange's side. They're pushing the Swedish government to release some text messages from the people that Assange allegedly assaulted, and they're thinking that might help clear up this case. But because it's basically been stalled with Assange hiding out in the Ecuadorian embassy, it's kind of, we don't really know what is happening. The 2 women have not even been identified in the press. So it's a tricky situation, and there's a lot of politics involved. Unfortunately, we hope that if these allegations do have any kind of truth to that somehow Assange will be eventually held accountable.
Well, Mike, I want to thank you for being on Truthout Interviews.
Thanks so much, Ted.
You can read Mike Ludwig's piece on Truthout. It's entitled "WikiLeaks Reveals Global Trade Deal Kept More Secret Than the Trans-Pacific Partnership." Thanks for watching Truthout Interviews. I'm Ted Asregadoo. We'll see you next time.